Alright, this is a topic 9.1, and we're starting a unit on congruent triangles. The definition of congruent figures, figures that have the same size and shape. Congruent triangles are triangles in which corresponding angles and sides are congruent. Look at example 1. The triangle ABC is congruent to DEF. And there is a order of letters. If you look, A is the first letter for the first triangle, and D is the first letter in the second triangle. That means A and D are the same, and you can use, this is called a tick mark. You can tick those angles and say that they're the same. So A is congruent to D. And B is the second letter, A is the second letter, so we know that E and B are the same. If you want to tick mark that, you need to use a different marking, so go ahead and use 2 tick marks. C is the last letter and F is the last letter, so those angles are the same. I'm going to use 3 tick marks to show those are congruent. And again, now we can name sides congruent. If AB is listed, DE would be the congruent segment. BC is congruent to EF. These are called corresponding sides. The first one, these are corresponding angles, these are corresponding sides. AC would be congruent to DF. I'm going to write that up here. These are called corresponding angles, and these are the corresponding sides. So whenever they ask you to list the corresponding parts of a triangle, that's what that means. Alright, in example 2, they want you to determine whether the following statements are true or false. If you look at the example 2, the order of the letters, since X comes first, wherever X is when you name the triangle, W has to be in the same position. So look at the first one. Let's write that down. X has to correspond with W. Y has to correspond with M. And Z has to correspond with N. So that we'll draw that to help us remember that. So look at the first one. Y is supposed to correspond with M. See how the first letter is a W? So since the first letter is not an M, that would be false. Those are not congruent. On B, Z has to correspond with N, and it does. X has to correspond with W, and Y has to correspond with M. So that one's true. They're in the correct order. Look at C. Y, it says corresponds with N, so that's false, because Y has to always correspond with M. You have to go back and look at the first one. Z corresponds with N, that's right. Y corresponds with M, and X with W, so that's a true. Just make sure you remember they have to be in the same order. The corresponding angles have to be in the same order. Alright, page 2. We're on example 3 and 4. On example 3, you have, it says use the given figure and information to name 3 pairs of congruent angles and 3 pairs of congruent sides. You really actually don't need the picture because you have the congruent statement. And if we look at the statement only, I think I'll do that first. If you look at the first letter E, since the first letter on the next part of the congruent statement is K, we know that E and K are the same. I think I will go ahead and mark the picture as I do this, but I'm using the congruent statement to help me. H, the second letter, corresponds with F, and G corresponds with G. So H with F and G with G. Now actually, I just realized on this picture you can't just call this angle G. If you notice, there's lots of angles that use that vertex. So if I really want to name this angle, this one that I'm marking, I have to use 3 letters. So FGK, I'm going to have to use to name that angle, because if I just said angle G, you could be naming FGE or EGH or HGK. So you really have to use the 3 letters that create the angle. So if I'm going to name the one vertical over on this side, I need to use, we could name it EGH. You do have to use 3 letters when you have a vertex with several angles. Now we're going to name the sides. The sides that are corresponding, you can actually go back to your correspondence statement, your congruent statement, and the first 2 letters are EH. So if I don't even look at the picture, I know that KF is the corresponding side to EH. I'm going to go ahead and mark those. The next one, I could use the second letter and last letter, HG, second letter and last letter, FG. So HG would correspond to FG. We can use tick marks to mark that. And the very last one would be the first and last letters, using those as a segment. So EG and KG. EG and KG. And because this is probably a scalene triangle, that's why I'm marking it that way. Alright, try number 4. Sometimes in your notes when you're working a problem, you might want to try it on your own. Like pause the video and see if you can do number 4 on your own. So go ahead and try that. Do this one by yourself. I'm going to do it. Maybe you paused me, maybe you didn't. But now angle A and angle C. If you look at this picture, you can't just call this angle A, because see how there's 2 angles, 2 small angles and 1 large angle at that same vertex. So since we're trying to talk about 2 different triangles, to name this angle I need to use 3 letters. So I'll use BAC. And then I want to name the one that corresponds to it, and it's going to be this one right here. So when I name that angle, I'm going to use ACD. Now we need to name angle. Now B and D, you can just say B is congruent to angle D, because that's the only angle using that vertex, so you don't have to use 3 letters. The last one would be this angle C right here, and this angle A, so you have to use the 3 letters to name it. That would be BCA and CAD. And that one you would have to use 3 letters. And when you name the segments, you're just naming the sides that correspond. Now looking at the picture, the way that I marked it, AB has the 1 mark and the 2 marks between it. It's called an included side. So AB and CD are the 2 congruent segments. BC are the middle and last letter, so DA. I'm actually doing this without even looking at the picture, because I'm using the order of the letters in the congruent statement. AB are the first 2 letters, CD are the first 2 letters, so I know those are congruent sides. BC and DA are the middle and last letters, so I know those are congruent sides, and then the first and last, first and last. Doesn't really matter, you can name it AC or CA, but it is the same side. So let's go ahead and tick mark all our congruents. Three pairs of angles and 3 pairs of sides. Alright, sometimes you'll be asked to write a congruent statement based on the picture, and if you look at the first letter they've given you in this first triangle is A. A has a right angle box, and so does D, so you have to start with the letter D. B has 2 marks on the first triangle. E has 2 marks on the tick marks on the second triangle. So you know that F is your last one. And it has to be that. You can't rearrange those. They have to be in the same order as the corresponding angles from your first 3 letters. Just make sure you always put the corresponding parts together. Okay, example 6. What information about the triangle is shown in these drawings? If you notice this one, there's only 4 things that are tick marked. two angles and two sides. You can start with anything. I think I'll start with the angles. If we look at angle D, since it's a separate angle, it has one tick mark, and so does angle U. The one that has two tick marks is angle K. The corresponding angle is angle L. The one tick mark on the side, DW, or WD, remember it doesn't matter the order, has one tick mark, AU. And then the two tick marks, KW, and the two tick marks on the side, LU. So those are the things we know because of the tick marks. Those are called tick marks on the triangle. Alright, for example 7, there's no picture for this one. So if you look at the letters D and O have the same as A and G, so it looks like we aren't given that. You notice how we don't know that one, so we can't use the 10. OG is the same as AT, so I'm going to use that one because OG are the last letter and the first, the middle and last, so AT is the middle and last, so I know that 2x plus 6 has to equal 12. And you really don't need a picture to do this one because you're using what's given in the congruent statement to help you. So on this one you would subtract 6, 2x would equal 6. If you divide by 2, your x would be 3. And that, in this case, that's all they want. You could check it if you wanted to put it back in, but that's all you need to do. Let me know if you have questions.